change it.
We can make some changes if we need to.
I'm just truncating the first part of it. Okay. Okay, we're live.
All right, very good. Okay, well, everybody, thank you for your patience. I'm Janelle Martin, the Nursing Education Compliance Officer with the Board of Nursing. Most of you do know me, but I want to really thank you for, I know it was a little bit of a late notice with the change in what we're doing with the annual report for the information session. So I'm glad you're able to be here with us. And as we were just talking about, we are planning to record this, so it will be on YouTube if for any reason you have someone who wants to view it or you have questions and want to go back to that. With that beginning, I just also would like to introduce who we have with us this morning. Because of the changes that have been made, Adrian and I usually are the ones who are doing the annual report review. Adrian is here as well. Colton's helping us with all of our tech support. Carol Moreland, our executive director, is here as well. But we also have two guests with us from NCSBN. This has been a joint effort and a lot of work done on the part of NCSBN to get this annual report. The basis of what our annual report is, we do have some additional pieces, but the work that they've done, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this presentation. And I want Kiana McIntosh, who is, I think, the kind of the author of the survey itself. She's helped get us all our questions on there and will be the primary contact at NCSBN for anyone of the administrators who have questions regarding any of the core data. We'll talk about that, or the survey itself. Kiana is going to be that point person. Joe Silvestri is also been very key in helping us get this all on the road and in answering our questions and will help us with answering questions today as well. Many others at NCSBN, but I think these two have had a key role in helping Kansas get our report up and running. So welcome to everybody and to our guests. And is there anything else, Joe or Kiana, that you would like to add before we get started? No pressure. I didn't want anybody, but
no.
Janelle, you might mention that they can enter any chat questions into the chat.
Great, yes. And because we are doing this in a webinar format, we weren't sure how many we'd have. It's just any questions that you have along the way, just go ahead and put in the chat. And we will either try to answer them along the way if we can get to them, or when we get to the end, we will take the questions as we get them. So if you think of something along the way, just put it in the chat and we will monitor that and try to get your questions answered from there.
There's actually a Q&A section that's built exactly for this in Zoom.
Okay, well, we can use either one. I know we have some already using the chat, so we will try to monitor that. But the Q&A section does also help with that. We can answer some as we're going, and other questions will be answered live. So Colton, that's a good point. The Q&A does allow for us to be able to respond online.
And so the Q&A pings everybody.
Okay. That would probably be the best way to do that then. So the Q&A section, if you would be a good way for us to be able to get to those questions. Thank you, Colton. So I'm sorry, Joe and Kiana, I asked you the question and then we got interrupted. Did either of you want to add anything?
No, this is Joe. I just want to thank Kansas for participating in this and adding to the amount of data that we're going to be collecting.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think with that, and Adrian, I think one of the things we had talked about too is I wanted to add, we do, as we talk through this, there are some additional questions beyond the core data that are requirements of the Kansas board per our regulations and per our work with the U.S. Department of Education. So some of those questions, and those will seem very familiar to you, are more toward the end, but anything regarding questions on those particular additional questions can still come to us at Ksbn, to me or to Adrian. We are glad to help with that as well. But we will proceed with this. And if there are questions, and always if there's a question you're not sure, I'm always a good point of contact to get you to the right spot. So with that, I think, Colton, if we can go to the next. I think what we want to do in this is because this is different from what we've sent you before, we want to talk a little bit more about the collaboration we've had with NCSBN to create this new annual report. And NCSBN's attempt or effort in creating an annual report that will create the first ever national nursing education database. I think that was one of the things that the board, when they decided to approve this and looked at all the data regarding this, decided that this was a really good process to be involved with, and that Kansas will now be part of that national nursing education and the research, and part of actually the first year of doing this was supposed to be 2020. With COVID, we did have some delays, so we are actually still considered in the pilot group and anybody in 2020 and 2021. So we are really happy to be part of that, and for Kansas to be included in that group of folks that are going to be providing that those first pieces of data and have that first report come out with our information as part of that. And so as one of the things that's important about that is that as the information is gathered too, it may help them in looking at the regulatory guidelines as well and seeing if there are things that need to be updated along the way. So I want to talk a little bit just about the background, just briefly. In July 2020, NCSBN released the evidence-based nursing education approval guidelines. And that's ones I have brought up in board meetings, and I think I've sent that information to all the program administrators. But it talks, and this is particularly geared toward undergraduate programs for those of you that have graduate programs as well. This is particularly geared toward the undergraduate programs. But the approval guidelines were based on 4 separate studies. They did an integrated literature review. There was a national Delphi study done, and an analysis of 5 years of Board of Nursing's annual reports and analysis of site visit reports. And I wanted you to know Kansas is included in those 43 states that sent annual reports in, and part of the 31 boards of nursing that included site visit reports. So they used all that information and looked at all that to come up with those evidence-based approval guidelines. And then once the National Delphi study was completed, they also included almost 300 experts in nursing education, regulation, and those who are working with new graduates that also helped in creating the diversity and information and the expert information that went into those national guidelines. If you can go to the next slide, Colton. So the results of all this study and what they did and the actual guidelines themselves came out in the Journal of Nursing Regulation in the July 2020 supplement. And I would just refer you back to that. I have sent that out to a lot of folks as well. It's a great source as you're looking at your own programs. Some of it may not seem to pertain to you as much, but there's all kinds of information about how that data was gathered and used and I can't think of the word I want, but to get to those approval guidelines and to get to what is at the core of what do we need to be looking at to help programs know and stay on top of their game in terms of nursing and nursing education. So next slide, please. Wanted to also include, and I think that the study that was done included regulators, educators, attorneys, researchers. The national studies were very important too in helping provide evidence, and that was part of the issue. We talk a lot about evidence-based programming and nursing practice, and that is also going into our nursing education and the approval guidelines that were developed based on that, going into that as well. So I think the guideline and the evidence that they have to support it is really very good, and that information is available to you as well. Next slide. So out of the national nursing guidelines then that were developed, then came the annual report development. And Joe and Kiana, if there are things I'm missing, I'm going to give you a chance to jump in if there's anything that we need to add. But after all that research and after those guidelines were developed, then came this annual report. And so out of those studies, they came a way for us to develop, or a way for NCSBN to develop a nursing education database and what information would go into that. So there are around 20 boards of nursing participating in the pilot year. Since it was extended, it's allowed a few more to become involved with that. And what it will do is make sure that consistent data is being collected and that we can aggregate that and look at the statistical significance of that. We do have other data that we're collecting, and that will not be part of the national database because this is just going to include that core data. And that's a lot of what you will see that will be different than what you've seen in the past. Some of the core data are things that we have asked maybe in a little bit different way, but will be part of the core data so that it has a way of making that a more, from a national perspective, we're able to gather that data in the same way. That was one of the things they found in the studies as they were looking at all of them, is that we do all collect a lot of the data, but it may be just a little bit different in how it's asked and how it's interpreted. So the core data helps them to be able to definitely define how that question is asked so that the answers that they're getting are consistent and are able to be apples to apples rather than apples to something else that we can't quite put statistics around. So I think that consistency in data is what really drove that core data. And what I think is important about what you'll see in this report. So the new database will help do that. So let's move on from the back. And I guess Kiana or Joe, is there anything else in terms of the background coming to where we are now that you would like to add?
No, Janelle, I think you did great. I mean, emphasizing the fact that we are trying to collect consistent data. And you will see if you go back to that JNR article that what we found from those studies, we did have a lot of evidence that contributed to the variables that we are collecting as part of the core questions. But what we found was that there wasn't a lot of consistency, and there were some across boards. Some boards were asking certain questions. Some boards had maybe 2 pages of questions, and whereas others had multiple pages, many 100 questions. And so we wanted to collect a consistent set, and the survey, the first part at least of this annual report survey that you will be distributing, has that consistent core data set. So thank you.
Yes. So what you will see before we get to Colton, you can go ahead and advance it to the next slide. In terms of the survey itself, is that the way this is set up is that you will see the core data first. Those questions will come first. Also, because of the COVID pandemic and the issues that came into nursing and nursing education because of that, NCSBN was very light on their feet in getting that turned around and getting some questions in place that they made part of this survey to be able to look at from a national perspective now, what happened with COVID, what nursing programs are experiencing, and gathering some data about that to hopefully help us as we are reviewing what's happened in this year and how we can move forward and what kind of effect it's had on nursing and nursing education. So I think that's a key piece. So those 2 sections will come first, and then there's an additional section, and I'll be showing you that. But that additional section then are the Ksbn required questions that are specific to the Kansas and not part of the core data, but things that are part of our regulatory process and that need to be answered and should look somewhat familiar from previous reports, although how you submit the information may look a little different. So that's what we want to look at. So in terms of the survey itself, the survey is actually done in a program called Qualtrics. Kiana has built all that and put all of our questions in there. And so there will actually be a link to a survey that you will get, but that will come from us. Ksbn will get the link from NCSBN, and we will distribute that to all of you in an email. So it will have a link to the survey, and it will also have a couple other links in it as well. And we'll talk to you about what that is. You will still have until June 30th to complete the survey. The difference is you won't need particular codes. We won't have to worry about your codes per se. You do all need your NCLEX. For undergraduate programs, you do need your NCLEX program codes. If you don't have those, I think most of you do, because you need it for our program as well. But if anybody has questions about your codes, you can let me know and we'll get that taken care of. But you will need to complete the survey for each of your program codes. So if you have a PN program and an ADN program, there will be links to, you will need to do the survey twice, I think. Or will it include, yes, for each code, you will answer the questions for each program code that you have. So graduate programs are going to be handled a little bit differently, because graduate information was not part of the overall data. It is not part of the core data. So anybody who has a graduate program, there's a question at the end of all of the undergraduate information then that asks if you have a graduate program. And if the answer is yes, then there are additional questions that are specific to just the graduate program. The only place that will be different is we do have one program, and Donna, I believe that you might be on, is that because our KU School of Nursing has both undergraduate and graduate, they will complete that survey, but KU's RNA program, it's in a different division, you will be receiving a separate link that will be just for the graduate survey. So if you have questions about that, I'd be glad to talk with you about that. But the email that you receive will have the link to your survey, so that shouldn't be a problem. It will come to you with the correct link. So once we send out that survey and the link, included in the email will also be a PDF copy of the survey itself. And I'll talk about that here in just a minute. But then NCSBN will also help us in terms of reminders to you kind of when we reach the halfway mark. If they haven't gotten some as many responses or haven't gotten all the responses, we'll just send a reminder about when those are due again. And they are going to be helping with point on that. So Colton, if you can go ahead and get us to the next. Kind of already went through this. I got a little ahead of myself. So Kiana is our point person for any of the core data and any of the COVID questions. Additional Ksbn questions, I said I would be the contact. Kiana's information is on the survey, at the beginning of the survey itself, and I will also include it in the email that we send to you. We will send you her information so that you have that. And a lot of the reason for that too is, you know, they've had some issues where they've had data come in and the answers have been questionable. Somebody recorded the average age as 1, and they know that probably is a questionable. So they might be contacting you as well to make sure that a recorded information is correct if they have any question about whether it looks like it could be incorrect or not. So they will also have your contact information to get those questions answered as needed. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned, you need to complete them for each NCLEX code that you have. So if you have 2, you'll have to, just like we have in the past, fill out a survey for both of those. And they will both include the core data, and all those questions have to be answered before you can move on in the survey itself. Once it will save as you go along, it will save the information in the survey itself. The thing you have to know is whoever's entering the data and putting the information it will save it as long as you come back to that same computer and the same operator who's had that, it will be there for them to continue that survey process. So you can't start it on one computer and then go to another. It won't have the data there. So you do have to come back to the same computer you were using when you started the survey, but it should all stay there. Shouldn't be a problem about it going away, and you can continue. So you don't have to sit down all at once and do it. It will save it as you go.
If I may interject for a second, Janelle,
Sure.
that's why it's helpful to have the PDF template of the survey. You may complete it via the paper version and then choose to use the PDF to input it in the electronic version. So I think that has been helpful for other boards as well. As you mentioned, you must use the same computer and browser. If you go to another browser or computer, you will enter a new entry, so you will not see your pre-populated responses. So, yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. So when I said we would send you the link to the survey, we are also sending a copy of the PDF of the survey. And that's where I was going to mention when we got to here, that you can use that PDF to see what the questions are and kind of get your data gathered, so that when you sit down to do the actual survey, go to the link and do the survey itself, you may already have all that data kind of in hand and know what you need to do. Because once you're in the survey, you do have to answer every question in order to proceed to the next. So having the PDF copy will allow you to see what the questions are, what data you might need to gather and have available to you when you sit down to do this, answer the survey and put in the survey questions. And so you will get a link to that PDF and you will have that available. So you can use that however you need to. If you have two different NCLEX codes, you can create two different PDF copies of that to show your answers and know how you're going to respond to those. I think, yeah, and those that have graduate programs too, that's the other piece of that. So if you have somebody else collecting data for the graduate piece, you can still, once you get to the link itself and are entering data, once it's all done for undergraduate, then if the graduate program has a different person who has the information, they can either give it then to the person who's submitting the information, or they would need to have the same, be on the same computer with browser in order to enter their information after the undergraduate has been done. So that's, I think, why the PDFs become important. And if you have more questions about that, would be glad to answer them. Once you get into the survey, it will save. As long as you go back to that same computer and browser, it will be there. And once you get to the end of that, then we'll talk a little bit more about the submission. But you won't accidentally submit it until you get to the submit button. It will just save it as it is, and you won't have to worry about it going anywhere. Let's go on to the next slide, Colton. So just an idea, this is a screenshot, and I'm sorry it's not very big, but it will have the Kansas Board of Nursing logo on it. It will talk about the core data. It will give you the introduction, and it will talk a little bit, it will kind of guide you through what's coming up, that you will have the core data and then the COVID questions, and that those are required. And then that the NCLEX codes are only for undergraduates. So those with the APRN programs, your section is at the end. And the Ksbn questions, just to let you know, NCSBN is serving kind of as the data go through for that. They are not gathering any data on graduate programs at this point. So all that data will come directly to us from them, but they will be gathering it all together. So that helps us with all the annual reports. Then will come to us, and we will do the data, more of the data statistical, and work on that end of it. Again, a reminder, Colton, the next page. This is just a little bit more down. So after that first part, this is just down a little bit under the directions. It does tell you have until June 30th to submit. Unlike our previous, it does not cut you off from the survey at June 30th, but that is the regulatory date and requirement that we have. So we do encourage everyone to get it submitted as soon as possible and not to get there, but it won't cut you off from it. So that is a piece that we are happy about. We don't have to try to figure out what to do with the data at that point. I think that was what I wanted to put there. So then once you get to the directions, and there's Kiana's information there as well. So that will be part of this in the survey. And then it leads into the beginning of the question, beginning with the names and some information about the program. Okay, next slide. The next slide is just an example. So this is kind of how the questions go. They're going to look a little different than this. This slide was done before I got the survey. So, but it just starts out with a lot of the same information that we've asked before. There's a lot of check boxes. A lot of them are very easily gone through. So even though there are 52 questions, a lot of them go very, very quickly. And so that was just an example of what that looks like. So next slide, Colton. What I did was then once you get, this is more from the survey itself, what it looks like inside there. You will see there will be a section that will be the core data. Then there will be the COVID section. And then you will get to a section that says additional questions from the Board of Nursing. And that's for us. So it will start out with contact information that was not part of the core data question, but part of what we have. So just so you know that there will be that additional section, and that's what it looks like. And it comes after the core and the COVID. Next slide, Colton. There are some additional Ksbn questions that will require an attachment. Some of you know in our previous survey, you've had to fill in things on preceptors and clinical agencies and faculty. And so how we're doing those questions with this particular new report is that we are allowing you to do an attachment. So if you currently already have a list of all your preceptors that have the required information, you will just be able to take that document and upload it into the survey without having to re-enter that information. For those of you who don't know if you have a document that's sufficient, there will also be a link, and you see in this question 8 is asking about affiliating agencies. So these are your clinical sites. We usually ask these questions. We ask for the information about them. There is a way to, so it asks for clinical agency information, and there's an Excel document that you can use to put the reported or the needed information into to use as your upload file. But it's there as a template to use if you don't already have one or aren't sure if you have everything that you need. So it shows you what data that you need in that template. If you already have a document that fills that bill, you do not have to use this template. You can go to the next question where it says choose a file, and you can choose the file from the document that you already have and upload it as it is. We've been working with Ksbn on this, and there are several different formats that will be accepted. So it doesn't have to be Excel. Helps a little bit on our end when we're looking at all the data and information. But if it's a different format, as long as you have all the required information, you can just upload the document that you have. But I wanted you to know those templates, if you want to use them, are embedded in the survey itself and are available there. But I will also be sending out the templates as part of the email that you get with the link to the survey and the PDF of the questions. I will also send a link to those survey templates if you want to use them. But I wanted you to know they'd be in both places, and they are embedded here for your use. And it will go directly to that Excel template. It's a very simple one, but if you want to use it, again, not required. I think next section, this is pertaining to just those with graduate programs, but I know a lot of the administrators are responsible for both. So to know that once you get then past the additional questions on the undergraduate, it will ask the question if you have a graduate program. If you don't, you answer no. It takes you to the end of the survey, and then that's where you can submit. If you do have a graduate program, you answer yes, it will take you to the next question and take you to the next section and allow you to answer the questions for the graduate survey. Again, in the graduate survey, there will be the same type of questions that may require attachments. Those templates are provided if needed. Otherwise, just answer the questions as they are there. And there's nothing new. There's no new data required in terms of the graduate programs from what you've seen in the past. It may just look a little bit different in the question itself and how you actually submit your answer. But other than that, it will be the same information. So this is just an example of what, again, it will show a separate section and it will move on from there. So next slide. Once you get to the end, then when you have all of your information entered, you've reviewed it, there is a place at the end that will have a summary of your responses. You can actually download that report before you submit. So you will have a copy of what gets submitted. So if anybody does come back to you with questions, you should be able to look at what you submitted to see whatever their question is about, what you submitted and what the question is. So you will have that available to you, and it will be, before you actually submit, it will give you a place to download. And then once you download that, we're going to show you here in just a second. There's a progression bar that shows you that. Once you're at the end of that, it will show you your submit. So if you'll go to the next, this is what it will look like. It will give you the actual link here to how to download it and let you save a copy of that once it's downloaded. And then you keep a copy of that. And then the next slide shows you what we're talking about in terms of the arrows. Your survey is complete. Once you click that right arrow, that's how you submit the report then that will go to NCSBN. So you see the 100% complete, the right arrow to submit, and it will take you the survey will actually take you in this order. So it will remind you to download it before you get to the submit button. Next slide. So we just want to emphasize at this point, once that's submitted, that we really appreciate the board for being, I think, forward thinking in terms of what the data that Kansas is providing will do, to be part of the national database, to be part of what we're looking at in nursing education. Hopefully we will benefit from that as well as we receive more information about what we can be doing to improve our programs and to stay on top of what nursing education is doing, and that you are going to be part of that first ever national database. And I just think all around that we as a board and you all as programs and NCSBN working with all of the boards of nursing, that we are looking at this from a national perspective, and we get a lot more answers and a lot more help and support when we're looking at this from, I think, from that unified perspective. So I think with that, I would just like to ask at this point if there are any questions. And Colton, next slide, just I think asked.
I would, Janelle, there was one question that was in the chat. It said, does that mean you won't want to clear your browser cookies during the data entry? I assume that is correct, that it's best not to clear those cookies until you have submitted the report.
Right. So I think at that point, a suggestion just might be whoever the person is who's the primary person responsible for entering the data would be one that would be the keeper of the actual survey itself from start to finish. If that's the administrator who does all that data entry, if you have someone who's doing data entry for you, then that would be that person. But yes, they would not want to clear if you have a security feature or something that clears cookies at the end of every day, that would be something to note. Maybe there's a different computer you need to use to do the survey so that you can keep that and make sure it doesn't your information doesn't get cleared out. It might also be a reason.
I'm sorry, Janelle.
No, go ahead.
And in the event that you do, pardon me, that you do clear your cookies, I can still retrieve your previously submitted responses and forward you a PDF of, even if it's an impartial survey that's not completed, I can still retrieve that information and send it to you as a reference. So you won't have to completely start over. So you can still have that data available. And then also, I meant to interject earlier, there is no visible save button. As the slides mentioned, that the survey tool does automatically save your responses. As you go forward from page to page, it will save your responses, but there's no visible save button, so do not panic. There is no save button, but your responses are being collected. So I think that's all I have at this point.
Okay. I think that's a great point, Kiana, in terms of if something does happen, you can't find your survey, something happens with your browser, whatever, that we can, again, Kiana's been a great resource. Bring those questions to us if you have an issue, and if she can then send you what you have. You may have to re-enter it at that point, but at least you won't have to refine the data. It will already be what you have entered will be there, and go from there.
And we had some additional questions. One was asking how they could contact Kiana. We'd be happy to route those around. I'll post our contact information. Should any questions come up, please feel free to reach out to Janelle, myself, or Colton, and we will make the arrangements to get that information if you have any technical issues.
Right. And I think what I will do is add a slide to this PowerPoint that will have that contact information. So we will send it out with the link to the survey. We will put all the contact information in that email to you. It will also be part of the PowerPoint, which we will put on under the educator resources on the website. So you can go to that and look at any of the information, and also we'll have the contact information there as well.
We also had a few more comments. One was from Cynthia Teal saying, thank you, Ksbn, for taking this approach to collecting core data about nursing education programs. This is a good step for Kansas. We thank you for that comment, Cindy.
Yes, appreciate that.
Then Sandy Pangberg said, will the ADN and PN surveys be separate or together as they are now?
They will actually be each NCLEX code. So since the PN has if you're a separate, and if you're a bi-level, you might be a little bit different. You'll be answering that as one program for both levels. But if you have an independent or a separate, the 1+1s and all independent, your PN program will have, your NCLEX code will need to be answered with separately from your ADN. So you will continue to have two separate reports just as you do now, or just as you have in the past.
And then there was a question from Susan Anderson, where there'll be a faculty table needed similar to the clinical site table, and if so, will there be a template for this?
Yes. There, I believe, are 4 questions that require templates. Your faculty information, your clinical data information, your preceptor information, and your courses. Those are things that are part of the Ksbn regulatory requirements. So those are information that you already have. But again, whatever documentation, as long as you have the pieces that are required, even if there might be some additional, and it's not in exactly the order that I have it on the template. If you have a document that has that already, use that. If not, the templates are provided for anything that requires a list or a data like that. And the link will be in the survey. And again, I will also provide the templates on the website, a link to those with this PowerPoint as well.
And I just copied our contact information into the chat section, should that be needed, and Janelle will send that out as well.
Right. So I know sometimes the questions don't come until you actually get into it and see it. But I hope this will at least help you. And like I said, the PowerPoint will be available and what it looks like. The survey is fairly directive. I think NCSBN has done a really good job in directing people and guiding people in what needs to be done. Again, Kiana's contact information is directly on those directions to in the survey as well. And so I think you'll have some good resources when you do, if questions do come up. I can't think of anything additional in terms of if there are other questions. Otherwise, I think Anybody else have anything that they would like to add? Kind of given time for people to think if there are any other questions that they might have. And one might be, we are getting this finalized. And so we are hoping to get the information out. We're doing another informational session on Thursday. So hopefully by next week, early next week, we're going to be able to have that link ready and information out to you all so that anybody who wants to get started can do that. As soon as we send the link, you're open to do that.
Janelle, we had one other question from Pat Plank, is how soon will the PDF be available?
As soon as we get that finalized, Pat, I will send that. That will actually come out with the survey link. So hopefully early next week, when we send that directive on how to fill it out, the PDF will be with it. So you will be able to review it before you ever go to the survey and start that process. Anything else? I know sometimes it's hard to think on the fly. I usually think of them later, but if you do, actually, it would be helpful just for those of you who are on today. If you do think of other questions that didn't get answered or that you didn't see in the PowerPoint, you might go ahead and send them to us. We're going to be doing this again on Thursday at 3. And so if there are additional questions there, I will probably try to send out some kind of
we had one other additional question from Susan England. Will the templates be sent out or will they be on the website?
Both. So I will include, as part of the email that comes out, the link to the survey, the PDF copy, and the templates will also be attached as well. I just wanted to let you know they're also in the survey, but you can see those ahead of time. I will include those in the link. I will also make both of those things, the PDF and the templates, available as part of this PowerPoint on the website, so that you just have to go to one spot, go to the PowerPoint, and the resources will be at the end. And I will add that onto the PowerPoint so that you can get to that PDF or those templates from there as well. So I guess what I was going to say too is if you think of any questions that might be helpful for the next time we present, we will include that. And then I will just try to, if there are any questions that come up on Thursday that we feel, are different than what we heard today too, I'll just send that out, as well as maybe a little document with questions and responses to those so that you have them as well, even though you attended today. Okay. Well, I don't want to prolong what we don't need to, but if you do come up with other questions, please just send them my way. I'm glad to respond. We've got one more. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. I just wanted to, we'll get those answered for you and as we go, and we will go from there. So Kiana and Joe, thank you so much for attending and being here for us. And we appreciate the rest of the staff being here as well to hear all the new information. And for all of you for taking the time to listen. And we hope this is going to be more streamlined than we've had. And we're just really, I just want to emphasize how glad we are for the opportunity to be part of the core data and the national database. I think this is just a really strong thing for the Kansas Board of Nursing and the programs of Kansas. So, okay. So thank you, everybody. I think with that, we're going to conclude and let you go on with your day. And we'll thank everybody. Again, questions can come to me and we will be glad to get those answered. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.